Hello. Hope everyone's enjoying Slay the Spire too. I have another slideshow for us today. Today I'd like to discuss synergies and answer a question: what should you be building around? Thanks very much for watching. Get that out of the way first. It's a fairly common question. What should you be building around? It's presented in a number of ways amongst the player base. Some people ask the question framed as, what are the best cards on a character? Or what is an archetype that I can build towards? Or are there any cards that warp the character that is just simply the best? You know, what's the S tier card? And today we're going to discuss a couple of these things, maybe, and give you some examples as well. First, maybe let's discuss what actually is a synergy and how is it different from other kind of discussions in card games and strategy analysis. So a synergy in relation to Slay the Spire. Slay the Spire includes many cards, relics, and encounters that adjust overall output or provide bonuses for meeting specific conditions. And when these conditions overlap, we call these synergies, or at least I call them synergies. I'm sure other people might have other definitions. It very much is a sliding scale between a synergy and an output, and I'm on the lower end of that scale. If two cards interact together, if two effects interact together kind of vaguely at all, I'm happy to start calling them synergistic. An example would be a single buff affecting many cards. Say, for example, if you have a footwork and you have all of your defense, as far as I'm concerned, that's a synergy. I was previously looking at removing those defense, and now I drafted the footwork, and maybe I got an oddly smooth stone, and now I'm interested in keeping those defense. If relics have the same trigger condition as each other, call them synergistic, absolutely. You have these ninja relics, the fan, the Kusaragawa, the shuriken, and the... what are you called? You are called the... oh no... kunai it's called. All three of these relics trigger when you play 3 attacks in the same turn. And so when you play 3 attacks in the same turn, if you have 2 of these relics, well, they synergize because they're both triggering from the same condition of playing 3 attacks. And when one effect meets the condition of another effect, I would call that synergistic. And maybe that's something similar to chaining, where the output of one effect can be chained into the input of another effect. Maybe an example of that would be something like the pendulum on the live version of the game. Pendulum draws you a card whenever you shuffle. And say, for example, you have a card like Prepared. Playing Prepared allows you to go through your deck, and then when you go through your deck, you can trigger the pendulum, which can give you a card back to then be card positive on Prepared. And if you're playing multiple Prepareds and you have a relatively small deck, you know, that could be anywhere between a synergy, and then depending on how many times you can iterate that, it could go all the way to, you know, a full combo. Playing a skill like that causes you to shuffle might also be synergistic with other relics as well. And well, I'm sure we'll talk about these things in general, but finding synergies in the game is a way to scale. It's not the only way to scale in Slay the Spire, and I suppose this is what I mean when I say that, to me, a synergy is a kind of interaction that cards have, or effects have, and I'm fairly tolerant maybe of calling things synergies that other people might not call synergies, and just maybe the way I think about the game. But I'll give you some examples. I think it's fair to say, though, that the synergy is typically considered as different from a combo. In a lot of other card games, comboing usually refers to when the game pieces that 2 game pieces that win the game when they're combined. In Magic the Gathering, we have Kiki Jiki, the Mirror Breaker. There are so many combinations with Kiki Jiki that just immediately win by allowing you to untap him or to clone Kiki Jiki, or there's another effect called Splinter Twin, which is quite similar. Pestamite was the classic way, but there's lots of different ways to do it. And cards that use a 2-card combo, like Splinter Twin or Kiki Jiki or any of these effects, their main goal is simply to put those 2 cards together. You won't find that in Slay the Spire. Slay the Spire doesn't have any in-text combos. You won't find any game-winning combos within the text on the cards or the text on the relics, just by putting two of them together, thankfully. It can be fairly trivial. Slay the Spire 1 did have a two-card combo in Rushdown and one cost or zero cost calm effects. Essentially, you could play a power called Rushdown, which lets you draw two cards anytime you go into Rage or Wrath stance. And you could play a card called Inner Peace, which is a one-cost calm effect, and you could play any one-cost Wrath effect. When you left calm, you would gain 2 energy, and when you went into Wrath, you would leave calm. So going into Wrath drew you 2 cards, and going into calm gained you 2 energy. And so you might imagine that a 2-card combo that draws 2 cards and gains 2 energy and costs 2 energy, you can kind of just go on the loop. And it did accrue damage as it went, and often accrued block as it went as well, because there was a power called Mental Fortress that gave you block every time you switched to stance. Thankfully, the devs have been very, very considerate in Slay the Spire 2, and not given us any 2-card combos like that where it's just on the tin. Most combos in Slay the Spire rely on setting a cost to 0 or abusing a deck shuffling mechanic. So as I kind of described earlier, if you have something like a pendulum and enough prepareds, that would be a deck reshuffle mechanic where a 0-cost card can allow you to reshuffle the deck and trigger reshuffle effects. Another example might be like Hellraiser. If you have a card like Hellraiser and you get your deck sufficiently small, Hellraiser casts your strike cards for free. Pommel Strike is a strike that draws cards, and so if your deck is sufficiently small, you can chain multiple Pommel Strikes together, and Hellraiser will play them all for free. Each time you play one, it will draw the next, and that will go infinite. So abusing the reshuffle mechanic by drawing the same cards again and allowing those to draw other cards again is normally the way to do it. You do need a sufficiently small deck, or you need a very, very full hand and a small deck to do it. There are a couple of ways, but to play a combo without going this deep to like a less than 10 card deck and abusing the reshuffle mechanic, you often need a card like Sneko-Eye. Sneko-Eye says each time you draw a card, randomly set its cost between 0 and 3, and if you have effects like Hologram, which let you pull a card from your discard pile into hand, say your Hologram roll the 0 cost, and you have a second Hologram that also roll the 0 cost, so 2 of them. So it's a 1 in 4 chance to roll 0 on both of them when you drew the card, and you can play a 0-cost Hologram to get you back a 0-cost Hologram. And because you're not redrawing them, because they're going between the bin, you can do that as many times as you like and gain infinite block. You're also playing infinite skills, which could trigger infinite leather openers, or could also trigger infinite tuning rods, for example. But you have a lot of block. If you have a body slam to cap that off, maybe that's one way to do it. But, you know, at some point you're going to have to pass turn. If you don't have damage on the back of that, at some point you have to pass turn, and at that stage your infinite block is going to wear off because it only solves 1 turn at the end of the day. When you solve a turn, it's kind of like having infinite block, right? As far as the game's concerned, the difference between 40 block and infinite block is kind of inconsequential. Maybe a reliable combo that you can theoretically construct in Slay the Spire 2 is between the Sealed Throne and the Axe. The Sealed Throne is a Regent Ancient Relic. It says when you play a card, gain a star, and you can receive this throwing axe from Tanks, the Act 3 Ancient. It says the first time you play a card each combat, play it twice. And so if you play Sealed Throne twice, well, whenever you play a card, you gain 2 stars. And the Regent has a card, Particle Wall, which costs 2 stars. It gains 9 block, and you can return this card to your hand. And then it returns the card to your hand. So you can play Particle Wall for 2 stars, get 2 stars back from 2 Sealed Thrones, do it again. And every turn, you can just keep playing that Particle Wall. How do you retain the Particle Wall between turns and make sure you have it on turn 1? Well, you can get the Royal Stamp. Royal Stamp gives it the royally approved seal, which gives it retain and donate. And so with this combination, every fight you can play Sealed Throne twice, and then you can play Particle Wall to solve every single turn. It requires 1, 2, 3, 4 game pieces. All of them are extremely random. The Sealed Throne would have to come from Darv on Act 2, so you need Darv in Act 2. You need tanks in Act 3. You need Darv to give you the Throne, which is a 1 in 4 in the 4th card pool. You need tanks to give you an Axe, which is a 1 in 3 in the top card pool. And you need to go to a shop relic to get Royal Stamp, and you need a Particle Wall in your deck by the time you do that. And if you do all of that, you still lose to the Doormaker. Because the Doormaker can eat your Particle Wall. Doormaker has a turn called Devour. Any cards you play that turn are exhausted. And so if you play the Particle Wall on that turn, you lose it. So you still have to tank the Devourer on that turn. It's not 100% solvable, even if it is an in-hand infinite. So the game is very resilient to infinites, and it's something that the devs are working on as well. So when we talk about synergies, we're not talking about combos like that. The game is really just not built for it, and it's something that the team is actively building against. Let's talk about what synergies can actually do, though. They can improve your output. And what output can we improve? We can improve our damage. Improving our damage allows us to kill enemies before they can attack, and end fights earlier before the bosses scale. We can improve our block. Improving a block allows us to take additional turns while preserving HP, preserving more opportunities and providing more opportunities to draw high damage cards and scale up. And we can scale our card selection as well. Improving our card selection allows us to maximize our energy expenditure on high output cards on the most effective turns. And when we're talking about synergy, very often we have a lot of high output cards because our cards are combining together to produce large amounts of output. These 3 cards, Perfected Strike, Glitterstream, and Prepared, are fairly non-synergistic. Prepared maybe is somewhat synergistic, and Perfected Strike is somewhat synergistic, and Prepared Plus is quite synergistic, but Prepared Minus, maybe take it or leave it. But when we're talking about these outputs, again, the game is fairly agnostic to the amount of block you have once you reach that threshold. So a lot of the synergy effects that we'll be looking for in Slay the Spire are ways to generate block whilst we're doing the rest of our activities. Damage, there's lots of ways to solve damage. You have to have an overwhelming amount of damage to solve fights before block really gets in the way. And card selection is something that you kind of do naturally in order to maximize the effects that you're playing. You don't want to play strikes, you don't want to play defends, you want to play your effects that synergize together. Synergies that improve our output can often be felt through substitution for those other output types though. So the game asks us to respond to being attacked with a certain amount of block, and in multi-enemy fights the game asks us to use damage to take threats off the table. So say, for example, you're in the Overgrowth Easy Pool fight. There's 3 slimes. There's 2 small slimes and 1 medium-sized slime. Well, in that fight, all 3 slimes can attack you. And when they do, they'll be attacking for 17 damage sometimes. Between 15 and 17, I believe it is. On turn 1, it's a good idea to kill one of those slimes. That limits the amount that they can be attacking for, because now only 2 slimes can attack. And they can attack for 13 or 11 and 3 or 4, and so all of a sudden you've gone from like a maximum of 15 or 17 damage to a maximum of maybe 12 damage, and you can kill the second slime and you can play 2 defense, and now you've taken a very small amount of chip damage by taking off those 2 slimes either side. So in the multi-enemy fight, damage lets you limit the amount of block that you need to build by taking those threats off the table and removing the capacity for enemies to line up their attacks together. The carnivorous leeches is also a good example of this fight. But again, output is self-scaling. The more output you can provide of one kind very often translates into other output of other kinds, and in a way you can think about it as substituting a budget. If you have the capacity to play strike, defend, and you have the ornamental fan says when you play 3 attacks, generate 4 block. Well, there are lots of circumstances where a player will say, I'll play a strike to take 1 damage. to say, I'll play a strike and take 1 damage. So very often, if an enemy is attacking for 11, you might play strike, strike. You might play defend, defend, strike. You'll take 1 damage over the top to play 1 strike and deal 6 back. Well, if you play 3 strikes, you get 4 block out of an ornamental fan. That's kind of like making the same deal again, right? I'm taking 1 damage to play another strike because the ornamental fan is giving me 4 block, as opposed to playing a defend, which gives me 5. And it takes you from a turn of 12 damage and 5 block to a turn of 18 damage and 4 block. So you're getting you're getting 22 total output instead of 17 total output. So it's an extra 5 number. You know, it's not great to think about raw numbers in the case of the game, but you know, if you're comparing the same turn with similar cards, maybe it starts to make a little bit more sense. But yeah, again, to really hammer in that point, the game doesn't care if you make 40 block or 1,000,000 blocks, as long as you just block enough, and the damage that you deal, the damage that you take will usually be within like 5 block, right? You know, so like a defend plus can take you from you know, losing 3 life to taking 3 damage while you're trading to losing 0. So it's a pretty substantial difference over turns and over fights, because the threshold is quite tight. Once you reach that threshold, you can substitute for the rest of your budget, and your budget is how you spend your energy on those attacks, and those defends. So what's the context of what we're talking about today, though? Maybe to start, it's deck building. So I do want to get some things out of the way, just so everyone's kind of having the same perspective of the game Slay the Spire. In many other card games, constructed is a thing that people are allowed to do. In constructed card games, people bring in pre-constructed decks, pre-built decks. They can sit at home and put 60 or 40 cards together. You can write it out on a deck list. You can think extremely hard about those individual inclusions, and then you can bring them into the tournament and you can play them against each other, and the metagame develops around how those decks are built together. In a draft, and many of these deck building games do offer drafts. A Magic draft, Magic the Gathering is a very popular draft format. Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, I know, have both experimented with it. Hearthstone has a draft format. I know a lot of the card games will try and do a draft format, or maybe like a fusion sealed draft format at some point in time. And that's maybe a little bit more close to the Slay the Spire, because in Slay the Spire we're building a deck from our card selection screen, and you know, we're choosing one of 3 things. Many other deck builders allow for that drafting from packs of cards, and the developers will include signal cards to signal archetypes to players. So this is a particularly common thing to happen in Magic the Gathering. I've just got a selection of cards here, I believe from the M21 set. I'll be honest, it's been a long time since I played. But each of these is a 2-color card. So this Leafkin Avenger is a red-green card. It takes red mana and green mana. This Conclave Mentor is a green-white card. And this Alpine Houndmaster is a red-white card, and this Lore Scale Coatl is a blue-green card. And when the players around the table are drafting, they probably only want to end up in a 2-color deck. Magic has 5 colors in total. They probably only want to end up in a 2-color deck. The developers of the game, the designers, have included these uncommon effects so that at the draft table, the players can see an uncommon effect like this, know that it's powerful enough that another player would have picked it if there was in their colors, and that can be a signal to those players that, hey, if I see Leafkin Avenger, there's a good chance that excuse me. Hey, if I see a Leafkin Avenger, there's a good chance that red-green is open. And now that I'm in red-green, well, the Leafkin Avenger has some effects to signal to me how I should build that archetype. These are called signpost uncommons in MTG. In Ra, which is an auction game, there's monuments, which do something similar. In Agricola, there's occupations, which very, very strongly impact the way you would play the game and draft the worker placement. In Slay the Spire, this particular signal role is filled by rare relics and rare cards. You don't really see them as often. I've got a couple down here just to try and maybe show you the kind of strength and the kind of impact that they have. So Pocket Watch says if you play less than 3 cards in the turn, you draw 3 more cards next turn, which is a very, very substantial effect. There's the ancient relic, the Fiddle, which allows you to draw 7 cards per turn. So Pocket Watch is a rare relic that lets you draw 8 cards per turn. On the opposite end of the spectrum of Pocket Watch is the Unceasing Top. The Unceasing Top says whenever your hand is empty, you can draw a card for free. And you might imagine, well, again, with the reshuffle mechanic in Slay the Spire, once your deck is spinning, so it were, if you can get a deck to start spinning and start rotating through and draw and discard cards and reshuffle over and over and over, there's a good chance that you won't be ceasing. This is a very hard condition to meet, but it can be worth playing into if you get an early Unceasing Top. Game Piece lets you draw a card every time you play a power, which mitigates one of the main downsides of powers, which is that when you draw a power the first time through your deck, you're not drawing a strike, you're not drawing a defend, and if the turn asks for a defend, well, you've drawn a power instead. This can let you at least play through those powers to give you a chance to draw your defense. Similarly, the Frozen Egg makes all your powers upgraded, which can really heavily reshape your draft. There's 3 eggs. There's a Molten Egg for attacks, there's a Frozen Egg for powers, there's a Toxic Egg for skills. And seeing every single one of these effects being upgraded in your card reward screen really changes the way you evaluate the draft. Normally, at higher ascensions, only 12.5, only 1 in 8 of the cards that you see are going to be upgraded. A Toxic Egg, I think most people would agree, is the kind of the high ascension favorite, but all of them are good. All of them are good. And then, of course, again, Kunai. Kunai says when you play 3 attacks in a turn, you gain 1 dexterity. Well, it requires attacks and it gives you dexterity. That seems non-synergistic in and of itself, right? Well, actually, any kind of dexterity scaling allows you to generate more block from your defense and generate more block from any of your block producing skills, which means that you no longer need to scale with things like footwork. You no longer need to scale with block producing powers because you can play all attacks. So this doesn't say substitute away from attacks to skills. This says substitute away from powers to everything else. So Game Piece and Frozen Eye let you take more powers. Kunai lets you take less, for example. And then Ice Cream, maybe Ice Cream is one that's actually fairly difficult to build around, but it's fun if you can get it early. It says that you can carry energy between turns. And so Ice Cream lets you do something very mid-rangey, because whereas normally in Slay the Spire you get 3 energy per turn, and when you have spent all your energy on your good cards, you've got like strikes and defense left over. Well, rather than playing out basic strikes, Ice Cream lets you carry that energy over, and if you draw a high impact turn with 5 good cards, you can play them all down. So it lets you hold those energy for when you draw your good cards. Kind of the opposite of Pyramid, which lets you hold your cards until the turn comes around. Ice Cream lets you hold your energy until you get the opportunity to draw the card. Also, for this video, we're primarily going to be focused on commons. There's a classic quote from Mark Rosewater. I believe it was from his design retrospective series of articles. The man writes a lot, and I appreciate not everyone that hasn't played Magic the Gathering for 25 years thinks he's a bit of a genius. And I suppose everyone that quit the game in their life, or anyone who's ever felt the sting of Force of Will being printed into a collector's box, aren't too happy. But this is something that is absolutely true. If your theme isn't at common, it isn't your theme. And so we're going to be primarily talking about commons today. Commons are the cards that show up the most. Each Slay the Spire character has 20 commons, and commons show up as 60% of or more of card rewards. They also have 36 uncommons at a 37% rate flat and 26 rares at a 3% rate flat. So there's actually more rares on each character than there are commons, and you see rares much fewer runs. So the likelihood of seeing an individual rare on a run might be less than 50%, whereas the likelihood of seeing an individual common on a run is effectively guaranteed just because of the distribution of them. This is a little bit all over the shop because, of course, rares do have an incrementing kind of pity counter. You can see my video on Ascensions, where I kind of go into scarcity in the Ascension 7 scarcity mathematics a lot more. But long story short, the expectation is more or less that you should see one rare card around your 12th common. And so by the time you see one of these 26 rares at a rate of like 4% per rare, you've probably seen 80% of the common pool. And maybe you've seen 4 of the 36 uncommons. You know, potentially with repetition as well, right? So by the time you've seen one rare, you've probably seen 1 in 9 of the uncommons, maybe like 11% of the uncommon pool, and you've seen closer to what did I say? It was 1 in 12. Oh, sorry, not 80%, closer to 60% of the uncommon pool. There's also 2 ancient relics, or 2 ancient cards. The ancient cards are things that you can collect when you see them, though, like you choose to take them. So it'll just be whether or not it shows up on the run. And you can't draft towards them. Once that opportunity is gone to see them, there's no chance that they'll be in the card pool after that. So they appear in slot 3, I believe of Darv, and I believe of tanks as well. But yeah, let's talk about the individual characters. And again, this is an analysis conducted at the level of the commons, because these are the cards that you can reliably see. My perspective and my way to like to play the game is I click play, I click start, and then I try and win. Yeah, I do encourage you as well to really just try and win every run, and you'll learn a lot more about the game, and you'll have a lot more engaging playtime. Provided you're playing it for that kind of bonus. If you want to play for the power fantasy of putting like a super strong deck together and going and killing everything in the Spire, that's fun too. Like, don't let me stop you. But Ironclad, yeah, the Mr. Run You Down, the kill you first guy. So here's common keywords. They support on damage, vulnerable, and strength. Vulnerable deals 50% more damage to the enemy, and he has strength scaling. So he has strength on cards like Strengthening Strike, and he also has multi-hit effects. So when you have strength on the character and you have a multi-hit effect that hits 2 times or 3 times or 4 times, like in the case of Sword Boomerang, those benefit from strength that many times. In the block slot, he has 2 energy cards. Now, cards costing 2 energy is not really like a theme or like a keyword, but it is impactful on the way that you build the character. And he also has dual effects, and by dual effects I mean cards that are like defend pluses plus a little bit extra. So for example, he has Shrug It Off, which is 8 block and 1 card draw. So it's a dual effect between generating block and card selection, a cantrip, if you will. He also has the True Grit, which generates, I usually play True Grit upgraded because it's an extremely good upgrade, so it generates 9 block and it lets you exhaust a card. So his block cards do this dual effect of letting you get this extra exhaust and this extra card selection, and that's the way his selection works. He has the exhaust mechanic to thin down his deck over time, and he also has a lot of these cantrips like Shrug It Off and like Pommel Strike. What resource is he working with? He's working with healing. So healing is a way for him to eke out extra benefits from cards. he will face trade and take damage in order to win fights faster and to give himself effective extra output, and then he'll use his burning blood to heal up after that. Also, a lot of the cards that he has that have high levels of output, they also deal him damage as well, and they rely on his ability to heal to generate that extra output. So like, for example, Blood Wall deals him damage, and Hemokinesis deals him damage, and I suppose Bloodletting is the quintessential card, the quintessential example. It gives you 2 energy to play something like a Flame Barrier, and deals him 2 damage as well. What kind of synergies does he have? Well, all of his relics also have these same kind of indications, right? His innate relic is a healing relic. This one is the Red Skull. It's 3 strength if he's on less than half HP, which gives him more damage. This one is the Old Mask, or the Forgotten Mask, maybe it's called. This one says the first time he gains strength during the fight, he gains twice as much. So, for example, if he has this with Red Skull, that pops off. The Self-Forming Clay. The Self-Forming Clay says each turn gained 3 block for each time he took damage last turn. And this one is one that a lot of people maybe underestimate the value of until you realize that Ironclad's racing. And so if you have Self-Forming Clay, they'll come at you for like 1/5 in the case of the birds, or 1/3 or something like that, right? Or maybe the Badonis will come at you for like 4/3. And then next turn, you'll start with 9 free block, and then the Badonis is coming at you for like 15. And so, oh, cool, it's mostly solved. The Self-Forming Clay solved the fight for me by giving me that block when I took the damage last turn. And I took damage last turn because I was racing, because I played 3 strikes. And then this one is Karen's Ashes. Karen's Ashes pays off additional damage when you exhaust cards. So this is 3 damage to all enemies every time you exhaust a card. It has great synergies with something like Second Wind or Feel No Pain. Feel No Pain gives you 4 block every time you exhaust a card. And so if you have Karen's Ashes with Feel No Pain, well, every time you exhaust a card, it's 3 damage and it's 4 block, which is most of an Iron Wave. An Iron Wave's worth a card and energy, and so you're getting a lot of virtual raw resources from that kind of effect. Your Shrug It Off, your True Grit goes from 9 block to 13 block and 3 damage. So that's an example of a synergy that can happen just across uncommons when you have these kinds of relics. And what you'll see is that the character relics tie the mechanics of the character together. The Silent has the same ideas. The Silent is the full block character. And you'll actually see she's the only one that has like a thematic blocking strategy of the characters in the game so far. The Necrobinder, Lich with Osti, she has something of a thematic blocking strategy, but it's more about summon as a keyword. But the Silent, her keywords support poison and shivs at damage. Poison is an excellent scaling damage effect because it ticks damage every turn and it gradually ticks away. I mentioned earlier it scales triangularly. A triangular number is when you sum multiple numbers in a row, and they have an equation n to the n plus 1 all on 2. So effectively, when you're evaluating a poison card for the amount of damage it's going to deal, you can kind of square it and then half it to get a rough estimate for how much it's going to deal. The exact equation, say for example, like Snakebite. Snakebite is 7 poison, so 7 times 8, 56. Divide that by 2, 28. So a snake bite by itself will deal 28 damage by itself. That said, though, when you apply more poison stacks, and poison is, in that way self-synergistic, you can just play more cards with poison and get more damage out of them. Shivs, not so much, unfortunately. Shivs are a mechanic of exhausting cards. Shivs have a lot of extra keywords attached to them, and a lot of synergies all around. But they come on cards like Blade Dance. In Slay the Spire 2, Blade Dance exhausts. It generates 3 shivs and it exhausts. And then the shivs themselves are attacks for 0 that each deal 4 damage, and they exhaust as well. The Silent has this relic, the Helical Dart that says whenever you play a Shiv, gain a dexterity until the end of turn, which is her blocking mechanic. The block mechanic offered on the Silent is dexterity. She has cards like Anticipate, which give her dexterity for the turn. She has powers like Footwork, which give her dexterity, and she has what's the scrub mummy, the scrub monster, gives thorns and dexterity as well. She has excuse me. She has a couple of these effects. But these give the Silent a lot of options that other characters don't have, because her defense can actually be quite good. You know, it's possible for the Silent to play like a Footwork, and you know, that effectively upgrades all of her defense. And now they're blocking for 8. And if she has an oddly smooth stone, they're blocking for 9, and if she has a fasten, they're blocking for 14, and if she has a second Footwork, they're blocking for 17. And you know, again, the game is fairly agnostic to the amount of block you have once you meet these checks, and most of the time what you're kind of expected to take, if the hand doesn't fail, is you're kind of expected to take 1 to 3 damage over the top. So like a lot of the early pool fights in the game will present you with like 11 damage or 12 damage, and you'll play like defend, strike, and you'll take 2 damage over the top. So improving a block like +3 does genuinely save a lot of the damage that you would be taken. And although it's generating less than twice as much block, you're actually taking more than you're actually like downgrading the amount of damage you're taking by more than half, because the amount of damage that you take is substantially lower than the amount of block you produce. We'll return to this theme with Osti, because Osti uses temporary HP and benefits from blocking twice because of that. But the other mechanic that the Silent has is Weak, and she starts with that in her starter deck on Neutralize. For card selection, she has Looting and Dual effects as well. So we see on a couple of her cards, like Backflip, or like an uncommon Escape Plan, cards which generate card draw whilst blocking. And she also has cards at common like Dagger Throw, which gives her a looting effect whilst being a strike plus. Looting, for anyone that doesn't know, is when you draw a card and discard a card. And that lends into her resource. Her resource engine is Sly. Essentially, while she has the capacity to discard cards, she can generate energy from the Sly mechanic, which lets her play discarded cards for free. And so at common, she has cards like Flick Flack, and she has cards like Ricochet, I believe is Untouchable a common or an uncommon. I'm not 100%. I'm fairly sure it's an uncommon. But like Flick Flack deals 7 damage AoE in the live at the moment. It probably should be 3 damage, to be honest, because it's very powerful. I think a lot of the discussion at the moment is that Sly is a little bit overtuned. In terms of her character effects, though, the Ring of the Snake gives her extra cards on turn 1, so just leaning into more selection. She's very much the block and card selection character, and it just so happens that she has Poison, which is a scaling damage type, which is really convenient. Tincture deals damage anytime she discards a card, so she can take advantage of these looting effects by dealing extra damage. Helical Dart again gives dexterity when she plays Shivs, which allows her to connect her damage to a block strategy. Snecko Eye increases her poison, Snecko Skull rather, increases the poison that she applies, and as mentioned, poison is self-synergistic, so the more you have, the more effective it is. So it's anything Snecko Skull is one of the few relics in the game that actually scales non-linearly in its strength, like compared to Vajra, which adds 1 damage, 1 strength, 1 damage per attack. The only way to get like a non-linear output out of Vajra is to use like multi-hits or heavy blades, whereas Snecko Skull, pretty much everything it touches scales, non-linearly scales triangularly with the poison. And then this one is Tough Bandages. It says every time you discard a card, gain some block. And so again, it connects the card selection to a block strategy, just in the same way that Helical Dart connects her damage to a block strategy. The Regent, though, the Regent's mechanics are maybe a little bit more self-centered, because he wasn't designed, and I'm hypothesizing here, because he wasn't designed around like the core game engines like Ironclad, Silent, and the Defect were in Slay the Spire 1. The Ironclad was kind of designed as the attack character, the Silent as the skill character, and the Defect as the power character. And you can kind of see that in the way that they're themed. The Regent is a little bit different. The Regent's kind of a resource character or a secondary stars character. The way he plays at the moment, and he is relatively new, so I'm still learning as well. The way he plays is that you kind of build up all these resources, and then when the stars align, you can come down with very substantial effects, very large effects. So he's kind of building and then all at once, slowly and then all at once. His damage is built around Forge and around Stars. Stars is the secondary mechanic. It's an extra mana type or an extra energy type that the Regent has that other characters don't. And Forge is the ability to build up the Sovereign Blade. So when you forge, similar to Poison, it's actually a self-scaling mechanic. Every time you forge, your Sovereign Blade gets bigger, and then Sovereign Blade always costs 2, and so you can play it, for 25 damage, and then the next time you play it might be 45 damage, and the next time you play it might be 65 damage or something. You do need to keep committing effects to it, and so maybe one of the ways to look at Forge cards is that if Forge comes for free on the card that gives you block, or if Forge cards comes for free on a card that gives you selection, that's a good way to scale your Sovereign Blade whilst also contributing to your block engine. How does he block? Well, he also blocks with stars. The stars are just key to the character for both damaging and blocking, and honestly for card selection as well. Decisions. There's a rare that lets you use cards for card selection, but for those core output types of damage and block, you do need stars, and so stars is just key to the character. Like the Ironclad as well, he gets block out of dual effects. Cards that are like strike pluses, defend pluses, but come with something else. So he has Gather Light, which is a defend plus that gives him a star. He has a Patter, which is a defend plus that gives him some vigor. Vigor is a temporary strength, kind of. It adds some damage to the next attack that he has, and maybe one of his sub themes is he has a multi-attack sub theme. But yeah, very much core to the mechanics that he has here for both damage and for blocking is the Comet effects, like Fallen Star and Neutron Star and Comet. These all apply both weak and defend, and they all cost stars. It's kind of a cycle of cards, and in doing both weak and vulnerable, they scale both of his damage and his block at the cost of stars. In terms of selection, and this is something that the Regent excels at, he has multiple ways and multiple thematic mechanics for card selection of transforming cards with something like Begone or Charge, which transform cards in his hand and cards in his deck into minion effects, which are free cantripping effects. And he also top decks with stuff like Cosmic, what's the effect called? It puts a card back on top of his deck. So he has a few of these effects that put a card back on top of your deck from either the graveyard or from hand. And as kind of discussed in my retain video, putting a card on top is kind of like retaining it and then taking a smaller hand next turn, -1 card draw next turn, which is very, very good, especially when the Regent needs so much help selecting those different effects. Card selection is a very big part of his effect because he has 2 resources to balance. His relics are all centered around these kinds of effects. So this one, his core relic, gives him 3 stars at the start of combat. It's kind of like not having one. It's kind of like not having a relic, to be honest, because stars are so crucial to his character and his card pool. That like if he didn't have any, he would just be completely boned. Like the Ironclad can go without his burning blood, right? The Silent can go without a bag of preparation. The Regent cannot go without this. Like it's too intrinsic to the character. This one is a Vial of Glitter. It says every time you spend 10 stars, gain some block, and so it connects, building and spending these resources to more output. This one says every time you generate colorless cards, generate some block as well, and that's the extra resource that he has availability to. Because the Regent has such a kind of push and pull complicated ecosystem of stars and energy, it's very easy to end up with a very small deck that can't solve a lot of problems, because every time you take a new effect to try and like think about solving a fight, you no longer can cast your cards because you can't draw your stars or star effects in time, right? So one of the ways that Regent has to solve this is he can actually just generate cards mid-fight. He transforms a lot of effects to make his deck smaller mid-fight, and then he can generate new cards mid-fight, like with Entropy and with Quasar and these colors card creating effects. These let him generate cards mid-fight, which allow him to then solve these problems on the fly. So if a fight does present a lot of issues and does present some real problems, he can generate cards to try and solve that. Whenever you generate a colorless card, he gets some block there, and he also has Pillar of Creation, which is a power that does the same. It's very much just baked into the character that he will have to create cards mid-combat, and one of the reasons he has to create cards mid-combat is because this stars mechanic is so constraining to the way he builds his deck. Effectively, other characters think about damage, and think about block, and think about scaling, and like finding the effects that they need. The Regent also has to think about stars on top of that, and it's just it's a bit too much of a push and pull. He also has the fencing manual, which gives him Sovereign Blade at the start of combat. Sovereign Blade is again a forge mechanic baked in. It's a self-scaling damage, just gets him started on that. And then this one as well, the little Regent. This one gives him strength every time he generates stars as well. So stars connected to block, stars connected to strength. Kind of across the board. Necrobinder. So as mentioned, Necrobinder has this summon mechanic which interacts with block and interacts with damage taken. She is very much the inevitable character, and she has 2 layers of block to work with, one of which is just regular block and regular defense, and one of which is something more akin to temporary HP for anyone that's played the Downfall mod. So she has Osti, and just like stars are core to Regent, Osti is core to her. Her damage comes from 2 sources, 2 damage mechanics, just like the rest of them. She has Doom, and Doom is a mechanic that accrues a debuff. When that debuff is high enough, the enemy dies at the end of turn, and the Necrobinder, she can apply Doom with a fairly high rate. And so although doomed enemies die at the end of turn after they get a chance to attack, most of the effects in the game give Necrobinder Doom kind of for free on top of whatever she's doing, drawing cards or applying weak or blocking, and in doing so she gradually builds up this inevitability on the enemy. She does have to continue blocking, she does have to continue answering those turns, but if she answers enough turns, the idea is that Doom will then just kill the enemy for her. She also has another sequence of damage options in Osti. Osti can attack for her, and when the Necrobinder is weak, or when she is strength debuffed, or when she can't attack, Osti still can. Osti's a separate entity, it's her left hand. And Osti has a lot of mechanics as well that synergize around his attack. So he has a flatten, which it becomes 0 cost if he has attacked that turn. Also, one of her base cards, Unleashed, deals damage equal to Osti's HP plus another strike. So that comes into the block mechanic. So her block mechanic is Summon, which grows Osti. When Necrobinder takes damage, damage has to go through her block, and then damage has to go through Osti, and then she can take damage. So Summon allows her to build HP on Osti, which stays from turn to turn. It's kind of like blurred or barricaded block. And when people, when she's not being attacked, she can still play like Bodyguard, and she can still play Afterlife, and she can still grow Osti and benefit from that temporary HP, to benefit from that summon in future turns. The rest of her block effect are dual effects, just like the rest of them. Really, the Silence, the only one that has like a really like overblown block mechanic. But her dual effects will give her cards like Souls, which are her card selection, or they'll apply Doom to the enemies, contributing to her damage as well. Her card selection comes in two forms, one positive and one negative. And by positive and negative, I don't mean good or bad. I just mean one that's additive and one that's subtractive. So Souls are cards that you add to your deck that work the same as Insights from Slay the Spire 1. And when you draw them, you can play them, they draw 2 cards. And so kind of like every Soul in your deck is just an extra little piece of card draw. She also has lots of ethereal effects, and with ethereal being on so many of her cards, one of the ways to think about it is that if you don't need the card in the fight, just let it exhaust when you draw it the first cycle through. By the time you get to your second deck cycle, your deck will have Souls in it. All the effects that you don't need will have ethereal away, and you kind of get the deck that you need for the fight for free just by drawing the cards, right? Like ethereal cards remove themselves just by drawing them, and the Souls come from your, like there's a common attack card that gives you a Soul in the deck. There's a common block card that gives you a Soul in the deck. There's a lot of uncommon and rares that give you Souls as well, but even at common you can stack these effects up. What resource is she working with? Turns. Necrobinder gets more out of a turn than any other character. She can always build Osti, her base relic builds Osti for her every single turn, so she's always building 1 HP per turn. She can always build her deck with Souls, she can always ethereal cards away, and yeah, like even if she's got nothing to block, she's happy playing her defense because they give her Souls in deck. And very much just as the fights go on, you know, like Necrobinder can take a fight to like 12 or 15 turns, and they're no closer to beating her because she's just building up Osti bigger and bigger and bigger. And even if they can deal her damage over what she can block, well, Osti can absorb that. So anytime any other character would be taking, you know, 3 damage here, 6 damage there, oh, I drew a terrible hand, I'm taking 12 damage. Not Necrobinder. She's put all of that into Osti. And this is a theme for other characters in the way that they balance their resources and balance their deck density, which we'll get into in a moment. The Necrobinder, she has this temp HP to buffer that. So even if she has a bad hand, which is less likely to have because she has Souls and she has ethereal cards to remove as well, right? Like just emphasizing again, she has very low chance of drawing a bad hand if you build your deck correctly. On top of that, if she does somehow have a bad hand, Osti can absorb that for her. The Funerary Mask gives you Souls in deck in the first place, which lets you draw more. A lot of the time on the other characters, when you have to draw more cards during your first deck cycle, it's to find powers. But in the case of Necrobinder, she can also find her ethereal cards and let them exhaust, getting rid of them faster. She also has the Big Hat, which gives her ethereal cards at the start of the combat for free. Sometimes, you know, it's just cards that you let exhaust because you don't need them, but sometimes it gives her a tool for the fight that she does need. And it's just a little way similar to generating colorless cards in the Regent. It's just another little way that she can get ahead on these other options. This one here is a card that lets her heal when she kills things with Doom, which can be quite good. Honestly though, Necrobinder, it's very rare for her to take damage in the fights that she's winning. A lot of the time the way the fight goes is that she either completely dominates the fight and never takes damage, and there's no chance she will ever take damage, or Osti is dying every single turn and she's taking chip damage over the top of Osti dying every turn. And Doom is not really a great candidate in those situations, although it can come through, but she has this ability to gain HP back from Dooms and just have that kind of conversion. And then this one I think is probably her most powerful relic, the Bone Flute. So the Bone Flute gives her block every time Osti attacks, similar to the Daughter of Wind, which is an event relic from the same event that gives you Bing Bong. Daughter of Wind says gain 1 block every time you attack. Bone Flute says gain 2 block every time Osti attacks. And so, as you might imagine, if you can attack with Osti a bit, and you will want to build up Summon for Unleash to scale Osti's damage as well, you can really focus most of your deck on building Osti and attacking with Osti around something like Bone Flute. I've actually got a couple of runs like that on the channel. Defect. Now, Defect is probably the character I played least in Slay the Spire 2. But I've played Defect a lot in Slay the Spire 1. He hasn't changed too much. He's changed a bit. And he's changing more as we go. He is changing more. But yeah, looking at the common pool for Defect, his common cards, his common keyword support damage coming from Orbs and Claw. Defect can produce 5 separate Orb types in Slay the Spire 2. 4 of them, 3 of them rather, are for damage. 1 of them is for block. 1 of them is for energy. At common though, he sees dark, he sees lightning, and glass. So glass is an AoE effect, lightning is random damage or distributed damage, and dark is spot damage on the lowest HP enemy. And between the common orb effects that the Defect has at common, you can access all of those. The Defect also has something of a physicality to them as well, and the Claw is an effect that's a common. The Claw is a card that scales with itself and scales with other copies of Claw. Every time you play a Claw, every copy of Claw in your deck gets stronger, and so it's fairly common to imagine a deck with 2 or 3 claws, or even just 1 claw, where every deck cycle you're scaling up the effect of all of these to more and more and more damage. And similar to like the Silent, right, where you can turn card draw into damage with effects like Speedster or effects like Sly and Ricochet, the Defects can turn card draw into damage with Claw. In terms of block, the Defect has access to Frost, and again to dual output effects. So the Frost Orb is 2 damage per turn when it triggers, and 4 damage when the orb evokes. And then in terms of the dual effects, the Defect has quite a good spread of them across the different mechanics and even the different sub-themes of the character. So there's Charge Battery, which gives energy next turn, and there's Glacier at uncommon, which gives Frost Orbs as well. There's one that gives block, and it gives a status effect to go into like a status sub-theme with uncommon. And in terms of selection, it's a very strange situation. Orbs kind of are like free cards with retain. Maybe that's one way to think about it. Orbs are kind of like this passive output per turn that's just always there in the background, and you can choose what orbs you put in there most of the time. And so in terms of card selection, maybe something you can think about in the Defect is that you're selecting which orbs to hold, and you can give yourself more orb slots to hold more orbs. It's a way to scale. And, there are other effects at uncommon and things like that as well, but genuinely at common, really the Defect doesn't have too much to work with in terms of status, in terms of card selection abilities. Most of it just happens at the orb level, and Frost Orbs in particular are usually what you end up going for, right? Because card selection, the reason why you often want card selection is so that you can try and have a turn where you block quite a lot, all in one go, and by holding onto Frost Orbs, you can have those Frost Orbs either at the end of turn, or if you want to commit to damage, you can play out Zap, and you can play out Dual Cast and these other effects to replace your orbs with damage for next turn, and evoke all your Frost Orbs to block quite a lot this turn. And in terms of statuses, in terms of resources rather, the Defect can use both focus to buff up those orbs, and statuses as a way to trigger other kinds of effects by adding statuses into the deck. And the Defect does have a couple of ways to turn statuses into AoE damage, or statuses into energy, or statuses into card draw. So it is a genuine sub-theme, just not at common. At common there's a couple of enablers. There's not really much by way of payoffs. But focus scales everything that the Defect does. And focus scale does that by scaling the orbs, and the orbs are kind of like a selected effects with retain, right? A lot of people will tell you that Defect was the strongest character in Slay the Spire 1, even with the lowest win rate. Because this ability to hold orbs is so incredibly strong. What about the Defect's relics? Well, there's the base relic, which is the cracked core, gives you a lightning. This one is gold-plated cables. It says that your rightmost orb triggers a second time, so it's effectively another orb with another orb slot. You can choose whichever orb you want to have there, and it triggers twice. Focus scales it twice as well. This one is Symbiotic Virus. It gives you a dark orb at the start of combat as well, so you start with an extra damaging orb. This one's Data Disc. Data Disc is just +1 focus, which is, synergizes with everything. Synergizes with your selection abilities, and it's just a raw resource that the Defect can output. This one's the Shop Relic, Runic Capacitor. It's +2 orb slots. And orb slots can sometimes not be purely positive on the Defect, because they do also cost you the ability to evoke orbs quickly. But generally speaking, holding more orbs, especially once you have focus, going from 6 block worth of Frost Orb a turn to, 10 block worth of Frost Orb a turn is substantial. That's 4 extra block every single turn. And then the more focus you have, the more that the greater that difference in scaling as well. The Defect, when you're playing lots of cards, Defect has a lot of 0-cost cards, has a lot of statuses that are like coming through and drawing extra effects and exhausting, and random energy out of nowhere, and the orbs are spinning all around. It is very much like the random nonsense character. Stuff is just happening. I had a run with the Defect where I ended up with more than 100 cards in the deck with the Broken Mirror event, and every single turn was just a million things going on, and I still took damage. So, like a lot of stuff can be moving, and a lot of effects can be on the screen that's not necessarily turning into output. Unfortunately, you do need to be careful with how much stuff you're throwing at the fan. But yeah, as mentioned a couple of times, output surplus is really what a lot of what we're talking about in terms of output goals. The immediate goal of the fight is to win while taking as little damage as possible. Each turn of a fight that you play, you're exposed to the randomness in the order of your deck. And what we want to be doing when we're taking a card is considering how to form hands that solve a turn that allow for that extra output. I've included some comments here that really get to the core of this matter. When you're going through your basic deck, especially early in the run, when you've got less than 5 card rewards, you can just draw 3 strikes when they're attacking for 13 and take 13 unpreventable damage. How do you avoid that? Well, a lot of these cards here at Common, they have dual outputs, right? Dagger Throw is damage and card selection. Grave Warden is block, and it gives you a soul, which is card selection. Cosmic Indifference is block, and it gives you a top deck, which is card selection. Lightning Rod is block, and it gives you 2 turns worth of lightning, which is damage. And Iron Wave, Iron Wave says deal 7 damage and it gains 7 block, but it's actually gain 7 block and deal 7 damage for free. Iron Wave is a defend plus that deals extra damage, so even though it's an attack, it's actually a block in disguise. That's how you should be thinking about Iron Wave, right? So when you have these kind of cards in combination, they fulfill multiple roles in your deck, and when these are in your hand, they can give you extra hand combinations, so that even if the fights go longer and you can't deal enough damage to solve the fight for free with Assassinate and Backstab and those kinds of effects, by drawing these cards that give you multiple output types, they can help you fix these little things along the way. And I want to give you an example here of 2 versions of the Fogmog fight. The Fogmog is an enemy in the Overgrowth. It's in the hard pool. On the first turn, he summons the Eye with Teeth, which is this eye here. Now, the Eye with Teeth is just going to give you 3 dazed a turn. And so the longer the fight goes, the more variance you're going to be having in these hands, and the more dead hand you're going to draw. So it really is just exposing you to that variance, exposing you to 2 turns, causing you harm. Every turn that goes on, you are going to be taking more harm because you're going to be drawing more days. What does it do then? It will attack you for 8 damage and gain the strength, and then it will attack you for 14 damage, and then it'll go back and do it again. So, so the Fogmog itself will also scale. It's scaling in both directions. It's scaling by reducing your ability to draw good hands, and it's scaling the damage it deals as well. Well, if you have cards that just provide raw output, say for example Charge Battery. Charge Battery is 10 block. That will always solve this thwack turn. Thwack's only ever going to come at you for 9 and then 10 and then 11. So Charge Battery will let you solve turns 1 and turn 2 of the thwack, which is turns 2 of the fight, turn 5 of the fight. So it's actually quite a long case of the fight being solved by Charge Battery plus. What about the Headbutt? Well, this one comes to 14 or 16. You can solve that with Blood Wall. You take 2 HP to do it, but you block for almost all the damage. All the damage on turn 1, and then almost all the damage on later turns. What do you get out of solving the turn, solving the block with 1 card? Well, you get to play more strikes. If you tried to block 10 damage or 9 damage here with Defend, you would be playing 2 Defends rather than 1 Charge Battery. So it would be Defend, Defend, Strike. Or it could be Charge Battery, Strike, Strike, so you get 6 damage. This Charge Battery, it says gain 10 block, so it says, you know, it's more block. But what does it actually do in terms of your hand, in terms of what you are allowed to play in your output budget? What it says is that you can play more strikes. Similarly, the Blood Wall. To block this 16 or this 14 damage, you would need to play 3 Defends. This Blood Wall does it for 2 energy, so you can play another strike. So although it says, hey, I'm a big block card, what's it actually doing? Well, it's allowing you to substitute your budget, your energy budget. Now you're substituting it towards strikes. So big block cards let you play more damage. You can also take this fight from a synergy perspective though. So these cards are just raw output. Charge Battery, Blood Wall. There are ways to make them synergistic, but they are just raw output. Let's talk about maybe instead the Necrobinder. If the Necrobinder was doing it with synergy. You know, so she has the effect Defy, which is an ethereal card, gain 6 block, apply 1 weak. That will solve the thwack turn in itself. So rather than 2 defense, she has the Defy card to do it there. And then with something like Dance Macabre, which is whenever you play a card that costs 2 or more, gain 3 block, she can have access to cards like Pull Aggro, which will solve the Headbutt turn for 2 energy. So normally she would need to go Pull Aggro to summon for 7 block and then the Defend as well. So she would need to spend all 3 energy solving the Headbutt turn. What she can do is she can play Dance Macabre on an earlier turn and then put that investment forward. So instead on the Pull Aggro turn, she can play an Unleashed with the summon, or she can play an extra strike. She also has Bodyguard, and Bodyguard lets her build Osti ahead of these turns. And so even if she has a Defend instead of Defy, Osti can absorb some. And even if she has like just Pull Aggro instead of Pull Aggro Dance Macabre, Osti can absorb some, right? So Pull Aggro Bodyguard is also a solution. Notably as well though, as the Necrobinder is playing these effects, she also gets to build up Osti towards a larger Unleash to take out the Frogmog in one go before the fight ends with her being overwhelmed by Dazed. You know, this is something the Necrobinder has to do, right? Because she wants to take more turns, but with the Teeth with Eyes putting 3 Dazed in the deck every single turn, she needs to solve that quickly. Returning to the idea of output density though, these cards that provide multiple output types improve the number of hand combinations that you can produce those output with. And being able to spend all of your energy on effective output is an effective heuristic for meeting most output checks. So rather than going through every fight in the game and looking at, you know, what kind of damage they can deal and what kind of numbers you need, maybe what you can do instead is just say, hey, if I'm spending my entire turn on this effect, that will usually be good enough. And honestly, in my experience, it kind of is as well. Even if you take some damage over the top, usually if you can spend all of your energy on these effects, that will solve the turn. And at uncommon as well, there are lots of these effects, 2 cost effects. which let you spend more energy on the output, that really just stack this down. So there's Flame Barrier on the Ironclad, which gives you 12 block and deals damage back to enemies when they attack. There's Dash on the Silent, which gains 10 block and deals 10 damage. There's Bulwark on the Regent, which gains 13 block, and also Forges, which scales that Sovereign Blade damage. There's Shadow Shield on the Defect, which gains block and channels Dark. Dark is again that damage orb, and then there's Severance on the Necrobinder. Severance is a 13 damage effect that gives her back souls as well. 1 soul in the bin, 1 soul in hand, and 1 soul in the deck. And so you can see that you can find these kind of cards pretty much across all the synergy types and all the output types that the characters are interested in on all the characters. I've just taken a selection here of effects that bridge 2 of them and are uncommon and 2 cost, because 2 cost is also worthwhile when you're considering spending all of your energy on an effect as well. 2 is better than 1 because it has higher density. And I think one thing you can be considering is how you can bridge these outputs together with these kinds of effects should they show up for you with uncommon. Here's a graph to kind of describe probabilistically how you can kind of feel those improvements. So this is I've shown this graph in a couple of different videos, but essentially it's the probability of drawing less than 2 good cards in hand. Across the x-axis here is the number of cards in your deck, and down the y-axis here is the number of good cards in your deck. And one thing I want you to consider for this exercise is that a lot of the time you do need to spend all 3 of the energy on one of those, on one output type. And so what is a good card? Well, when you're looking at the Waterfall Giants Explosion, block cards are good cards, and nothing else is. It doesn't matter if it's the best attack in the game. You only care about block cards. And so when you have like a basic deck with 4 defense, and then you take 5 attack cards in a row, well, you've gone from having 4 defense in the 10 card deck and having a 26% chance to draw 3 energy worth of defense, 3 defense, or sorry, 2 or more energy worth of defense. Now you have a 59% chance of drawing less than 2 good cards worth, which is 40% of the time you won't even draw 2 defense. You'll draw 60%, 40% of the time you'll be drawing mostly attacks, and you'll only be able to block for 5. And so it is important to choose effects like these, like Flame Barrier and like Dash and like Shadow Shield, which stack on that density for both damage density and block density especially, or block density and selection density if you can find it. And selection and attack density are nice to have, but on a lot of turns you probably still won't be able to play them. Like I've drafted Severance a number of times. You don't always get to play it, unfortunately. But Bulwark, you always get to play Bulwark. Shadow Shield, you always get to play Shadow Shield. Dash might be one of the highest performing silent cards, right? Like if you can take a Dash, like on floors 1 through 5, you're usually extremely happy. It'll perform well for you. It'll perform well for you until you have a deck that's kind of tuned enough and built up enough that you don't need to benefit from these density improvements. But sometimes the turn is demanding that you spend all your energy on block, or all your energy on damage, or all of your energy on scaling as well, right? Like the Phantom fight, in the early stages of the Phantom fight, it's not coming for you for a lot, and your attacks don't do anything. So you're better off doing a lot of scaling if you can. And the Fish fight, the Fish gives you a lot of turns off to fix your deck. So you can play your charges, and you can play your exhaust effects or your transform effects, right? And those cards that provide multiple output types improve your output density for these types specifically. And again, really, you can choose whatever is good here. In some turns, what's good is going to be only cards that deal damage, or only cards that block. And so when you're looking at synergies, one of the things you can consider, or maybe one of the things you can overrate, is you can overrate effects that chain different kinds of outputs together. Accuracy says shivs deal 4 additional damage. That's great. We love it. Do you need to deal 4 additional damage with shivs? Well, you could just make another Shiv, right, to deal more damage, or you have strikes to deal that damage. What if you draw your Shiv cards and you don't need to do damage that turn? Well, accuracy isn't actually helping you spread any of that out. It's not improving your density across these different output types. It's just increasing your damage with shifts, which can still be incredibly good. You know, maybe you do need to spend all of your damage, all of your energy on damage. That'll work on in that case where you want to spend everything on damage. But what if you don't? Well, you have effects like After Image, right? After Image turns your card plays into block. And so if you have After Image, your Shiv cards can still give you block back. There's cards like Parry. Parry says whenever you play the Sovereign Blade, gain 6 block. Well, if you have the Sovereign Blade in hand all the time, and I think Parry is like, the numbers keep going up on the beta. I'm not sure where they are right now. I think it might be like 12 block or something for playing the Sovereign Blade. But you always retain the Sovereign Blade. And so if you have Parry in your deck, even if you don't draw any block, and you have a turn where you spend all your energy on block, you can play your Sovereign Blade as a block card. And then a couple of relics will let you do that as well, right? There's the Bone Flute again, which lets you turn your Osty attacks into block. This one's Permafrost. It lets you turn the power into block as well. 6 block when you play power. And this one's the Leather Opener. This one's the opposite. That lets you turn skills into damage. Every time you play 3 skills, it deals 5 damage in AoE. And so these kind of cards and powers and these kinds of relics, which lets you transform one output type into another, I think are pretty much the gold standard for synergies, and one thing that you want to really strongly consider when you're drafting your card picks. Do you have these effects that can convert one type into another, or does taking a card like Parry let you improve your block density quite substantially by having Sovereign Blade act as a block card? A lot of the time, a card like Parry will overperform compared to like a Gather Light, if you've already got, the fencing manual. Continuing though on output checks, almost all the turns of the game are trivialized by at least one card in the card pool. These are heuristically known as time walk effects, and adding a card to solve a hard fight is often the strongest strategy. So again, talking about synergies, very often you want to talk about synergies at the level of the deck and not at the level of the cards. So we do need the deck to do quite a lot of things in the game, and one of the things we're going to ask our deck to do is solve all these different fights. A character's card pool might not be able to solve these things at common or at uncommon, or the mechanics might not be able to solve these things by themselves. Often the best thing to do for a deck is to supplement a gap, a weakness in its card profile and its capacity with just like a rare. So I've chosen out 5 rares here that very much solve problems on the character that they're on. So Echoing Slash deals 10 damage to all enemies, and if it kills an enemy, it goes again. Well, the Silence, she has a lot of scaling damage with poison, and she has a lot of single target physical damage with like Assassinate. But in terms of AoE damage, her AoE can be fairly soft, like Dagger Spray or Fan of Knives are her options there, and they're not particularly strong. So Echoing Slash is a way to do that as well. On the Ironclad, there's Stoke, which exhausts his hand. On the live, it draws cards, and on the beta, it gives a random hand, like a dead branched hand. Why is this good for the uncommon? For the Ironclad? Because the Ironclad has very few ways to generate other cards, and the Ironclad has very few ways to he doesn't have few ways to draw cards, but his ways to draw cards are quite limited when you're talking about things like a Battle Trance. So if he's spending energy on cards like Burning Pact or like True Grit, he can exhaust some statuses that way, but often like Stoke is just going to be very, very, very efficient at doing the same thing. So against like the Mecha Knight, Stoke will solve the whole Mecha Knight turn and exhaust all of those burns as though it was a Fiend Fire. End of Days for Necrobinder. End of Days deals 29 doom to all enemies, and then it kills them if they have enough doom. This is an excellent effect for solving a lot of the fights Necrobinder has trouble with, like the Decimillipede and like the roaches. She struggles quite a lot with these smaller enemies because she's so reliant on scaling in really, really mechanically slow ways. And so End of Days is a very fast way to end those fights, regardless of the number of enemies in the fight. 7 stars on the Regent. 7 stars is kind of like the culmination attack on the character. And I think, in my experience playing Regent, it's one of the few ways you can get access to like a damage card that solves a lot of problems that you can't solve otherwise on the character. He has Crush Under for AoE. He has the 8x3 for single target, like multi-hit. He doesn't have too much strength though, and everything's kind of built around stars. 7 stars uses 7 stars to play, and actually triggers your child of light, child of the stars 7 times, and so it's a big block card as well. Yeah, most of the time when you're building the Regent. So it's just an incredibly high output card on the character that does suffer from having not many cards with extremely high output. Like, you do need to invest those stars for high output most of the time, or roll like a big colorless card like Jackpot, right? And then on the Defect, Genetic Algorithm. Genetic Algorithm is just a scaling block card. Any fight in the game that's going to deal him damage, like you develop Genetic Algorithm until it blocks for 70, and then it's effectively an apparition, right? So Defect can build their own apparition. The point of showing this slide is just to explain again that there are lots of things that the synergy can't solve. In the cards interacting with each other. So even if the cards don't have any kind of interaction or any mechanical overlap, and even if they seem like playing one has no impact on playing the other, if 2 cards cover each other's weaknesses, like if one card solves a multi-hit fight like Echoing Slash, and one card solves like a slow grindy fight like a Snakebite, or if End of Days solves the fights that Osti can't win with Unleash. Like, as far as I'm concerned, those 2 cards go together, you know? They're covering each other's backs. I did mention I had a fairly low threshold for calling something synergistic, but I do think that these kinds of effects do solve a lot of problems on the characters. You know, you do want to keep an eye out for these rares and draft them with high priority. And of course, you know, all of this is relying on the notion that these synergies allow us to get extra output from our combinations. But you can just draw more cards, you can just play more energy. You know, if you have very high output cards in your deck, even if they don't have any synergy, maybe the best strategy is just to draw them again and play them again, rather than try and like combine multiple effects in a row. A lot of the relics in the game let you do this. You know, Bag of Prep is draw extra cards, Lantern is extra energy, Gremlin Horn is extra energy, and the cards Nunchucks is extra energy. These ones here, the game piece draws cards for powers, and the Mummified Hand gives energy for powers. Pale's Blood is a 6 card every turn pumpkin. I really like the pumpkin. Pumpkin into Act 2 is a massive power spike, and you don't need Pumpkin in Act 3. You just need to survive Act 2. So, like, it's totally fine. Every character has access to Brightest Flame. Every character has access to a 4th energy from Orb. And every character has access to these colorless cards, Master of Strategy, Automation, and Production. So, improving output is very feasible for every character in the game. If you roll these effects, if you find these effects, and they will present to you, in some way or another. The relic pool's not that big, the uncommon pool's not that big. You can always go to more shops. And then on the characters themselves, they do have these rare cards that give them these abilities. The Defect has Machine Learning for extra cards. The Ironclad has Offering. Again, using health as a resource to increase that output, get those resources to improve the velocity of the first playthrough of the deck. The Silent, she has that Adrenaline. The Necrobinder, this one's Domain, I think it's pronounced. Someone let me know it's pronounced Domain. This one is actually more in theme with Necrobinder. At the start of your turn, gain an extra energy and draw an additional card, but it costs 3. So just like Necrobinder's theme, this one is going to accelerate every turn for the rest of the game, as opposed to accelerate right now. I suppose the machine learning somewhat is doing that as well, but paying off both an energy and a card draw is absurd. Like, after Domain comes down, you really should never be losing. I think it is probably one of the most powerful cards in the game. Necrobinder has a lot of powerful effects, but she does kind of just die out of the blue sometimes if the scaling isn't going right. So it's very much like a kind of like a battleship kind of situation, right? And then Tyranny on the Regent. The Regent, I think Tyranny is probably the strongest card on the Regent, to be honest. It can upgrade to have innate, same as Machine Learning, and it draws you a 6th card every turn, and then you can exhaust a card. And so, kind of as we were discussing earlier, the Regent has that problem of having a very, very weirdly balanced resource generating mechanics, on top of needing to maintain block density, on top of needing to maintain attack density. And one of the ways that the Regent can get around that is by generating cards with Spectrum Shift and with Quasar and things like that. Tyranny lets you attack it from the other direction, and it can do so incredibly reliably by removing basics and removing star costs from your deck that you don't need for this particular fight. You can dedicate all of your resources to those effects that you do need for the fight, and also you can take out any of those superfluous sideboard cards, silver bullets, which are, again, are unneeded, and just really concentrate your ability to play Wish and to play your star generating cards and your star spending cards for the purpose of the fight. I want to give you some examples here as well of some single solve multiple enemies types. These are cards that you can just take even if they have no synergy. Again, 7 stars and End of Days and Echoing Slash. On the Defect, there's Sunder, which kills an enemy and gives you 3 energy back, so it's kind of like a free pop on an ad. And of course, the Ironclad has Whirlwind. So in all of these acts, even in Act 3 with the Chompy books, like, you have good reasons to take these single, these kind of like mass multiple mob ending effects. And the characters that have them at uncommon, maybe one way to think about it is that these characters are better at solving those, and that's why the other characters have them on rare, right? Like, if a card is rare, that doesn't necessarily mean it's better. Often it just means it's an effect that the character's worse at, because you see those rare cards less often. A character having a rare card is not an indication that the character can do that thing. Again, you see maybe like 2 rare cards an act, 1 guaranteed from the boss, and there's 36 in the pool. So even if you see 9 rare cards over the course of the run, you're still only seeing a quarter of the rare cards before you get duplicates as well. So seeing 7 stars in like 1 in 6 runs is not a good indication that the character can do these kinds of effects. Damage racing is a massive part of the game. The Terror Eel, the Badonis, Act 2 and Act 3 less so, but definitely in Act 1, damage racing is a big part. I had to kind of go out of my way to find this is a slumbering beetle from the Hive. Maybe when the new Act 2 and the new Act 3 come out, like the City and the Inferno or whatever it might be, we'll see some more fights that are centered around being a race. But in terms of Act 1, like Badonis is probably the quintessential example, and you can play the Overgrowth this way, just race them all down. They're really good fights for the Ironclad in particular, but in terms of cards that really, really work hard in these fights, Abrasive on the Silent gives her 6 Thorns and a Dexterity, so she can focus on blocking and dealing that damage back with Thorns. Free damage from just taking extra turns and being attacked there. Reanimate on the Necrobinder. Reanimate is summon 25 or 20 unupgraded, and it puts Ostie in this position where Ostie now has enough HP to scale past these fights and absorb turns and turns and turns of damage ahead, without needing to gradually tick Ostie up by passing turn or by playing Bodyguard. It's just a huge surge in that max HP. Ice Lance on the Defect It says 24 damage, channel 3 frost. So you can deal that damage to Badonis. You know, Badonis has 99 HP. This is a quarter of Badonis' HP pool. And the first time you do it, it'll block for 6. But then the next time you do it, it'll block for, 6 frost and then 12 from the evoked up to 18. So, playing Ice Lance or playing Ice Lance around your cold snaps and around your ball lightnings is very, very effective to deal substantial amounts of damage whilst blocking at the same time. And, these are just big iron waves. At the end of the day, these cards are just really big iron waves. Comet, 44 damage, 3 weak, 3 vuln. Well, all of Regent's cards look like this, right? They apply weak and vulnerable, and all of them are just good for racing. In terms of like the Fallen Star starter car and the uncommon a Neutron Star as well. And then Colossus. the Ironclad doesn't have too many effects that actually let him block. So Colossus is one that's I think unique in doing so, and also blocks a lot. So the Ironclad kind of has this block, barricade, feel no pain, second wind, dark embrace engine at or like all at rare. And then it has corruption at the ancient relic as well. So Ironclad and Slay the Spire 1 maybe access this kind of barricade engine a lot more commonly. In Slay the Spire 2, it's fairly watered down, and the character's mostly centered around being like being that attack engine on vulnerable. So Colossus gives you that diadem effect if the enemy is vulnerable. So like a super weak kind of like a champion's belt kind of situation. But yeah, this will solve a lot of damage whilst you're outputting vulnerable and just racing them down. And statuses as well. So kind of no matter how much synergy you have in your deck, you do want to think about solving status fights just by themselves. Begone on the Regent lets you transform a card into your hand, and so if you do see that beckon, you can begone it. Snakebite on the Silent. The Silent doesn't actually have too many effects to transform or exhaust these statuses. Instead, she has a lot of cantrips, and she has some retain as well. So if you do draw a handful of Dazed, or if you do draw a handful of Infects, you can still play Snakebite because it retains from turn to turn. It gives you like a minimum threshold on how bad a hand can be. And so when you do like draw a bunch of Dazed, or even against the fish, like I mentioned in the Overgrowth versus Underdogs video, like even against the fish, if you draw a hand of all beckons and like you can prepare them away and then it's intangible, the Snakebite still applies that poison, and the poison will keep ticking away on future turns. So being able to load up a substantial amount of damage into a retain card is really powerful. Seance on the Necrobinder, of course, lets her find those beckons in the deck and remove them. And the Defect has Compact. The Defect has like this status sub-theme. So is really, really happy to see these enemies and kind of take advantage of it by turning it all into fuel. And then, of course, the Ironclad has the exhaust mechanic baked in. So True Grit and Fiend Fire and Second Wind are all there waiting for these exhausts to show up, and the Ironclad doesn't really care. It's just going to keep cycling through and playing attacks and applying Vuln and drawing cards and playing Anger and Bully with 0 cost effects, and use cards like True Grit and Second Wind to get rid of those exhausts so that it doesn't have to draw them again. But yeah, now that we've talked a lot about when you don't need to think about synergy, let's maybe go back to what the video was proclaiming to be about with these synergies. I want to give you an example of each a synergy packet for a single target fight. So we'll go through each of the 5 characters, and I've constructed each of these as 1 uncommon and 4 commons to go with it. And honestly, for the commons, you can kind of take your pick. All the commons on all the characters are pretty flexible and have a lot of synergy by themselves. Like I wonder how bad it is to kind of draft at random, like, or maybe just draft in terms of like, I need more block, I need more defend, or like, oh, this card has more output than the other one. Like, I do wonder how bad it is, because the common pools, when I was kind of constructing these examples, you kind of take your pick. But I've chosen an uncommon and a couple of commons to maybe demonstrate a synergy that you can kind of build early in Act 1, and also a couple of relics that will synergize with it. So if you do roll large capsule on Niao, or if you do get a random relic from Niao, or like an early shop or an early elite, or a this or that, and take a relic and a curse, like these are the kind of relics you can maybe imagine would synergize well with this package. So on the Ironclad, the uncommon of choice is Stampede. At the end of your turn, one random attack is played from your hand. Now you can take something like Bludgeon, but the one I've chosen that common here is Perfected Strike. Perfected Strike has all the synergy with other cards that say Strike, of course, and the Ironclad has these effects that are cantrips, like Pommel Strike and like Shrug It Off, that give you block or give you an attack with a card draw, and also effects like Headbutt, which let you top deck a card. So for example, a sequence you could do is you could have Stampede playing a free attack every turn. You could Perfected Strike a one turn from the Stampede. Then you could play Headbutt to put the Perfected Strike back on top, and you could play Shrug It Off to draw it, or Pommel Strike to draw it, and then play Perfected Strike again for free with the Stampede. Of course, Strike Dummy goes well with this kind of strategy. Pen Nib, anytime you're playing a large attack, Pen Nib, rears its head and says, hey, can I double that? This one's Intimidating Helm. It gives you extra block every time you play a card that costs 2 or more. I really like it. I think it's fairly underrated, and it will trigger every time you play Perfected Strike, even on the Stampede. Stampede is a power, so it gives you the ability to take advantage of permafrost and get it down while generating block. And permafrost lets you cover the output that you need to play Stampede without taking that damage over the top. And this one's Sturdy Clamper, lets you carry block from turn to turn. And you might imagine, well, if you're playing this kind of sequence where you're taking Headbutt to put Perfected Strike back on top, sometimes you might play Shrug It Off just for card draw, right? This isn't just generate a block, draw a card. It's also draw a card and take a block. And so something like Sturdy Clamp can let you carry that block from turn to turn. So even when you use cards like Shrug It Off for a card draw, just for their draw ability rather than for block as well, you can still utilize that block from turn to turn as though you were the Necrobinder. For the Silent, I've chosen this kind of demo package here around Hand Trick. Hand Trick is a 1-cost skill that says gain 7 block and add Sly to a skill in your hand this turn. So one of the things you need to take advantage of that is, of course, the looting ability. So Dagger Throw or Prepared will let you do that both at common. And there's Backflip as well here to help you draw these effects together, because this is a combo that you do need in hand all together at once. Well, what kind of skill can you apply that Sly to? You can apply it to Snakebite. Snakebite retains. It's a very high impact effect when you do play it. So having it retain through until you draw it with Hand Trick, or Hand Trick in the Snakebite and retaining the Sly on it until you draw a Prepared or a Dagger Throw is very easy to do, and it's all at common with the exception of the Hand Trick itself. And it will apply 7 damage each time, and that poison is self-synergizing, so drawing this combination more and more times will scale out of control really quickly. Some relics to synergize with this effect, Tough Bandages, block every time you play Prepared or Dagger Throw. This one's the Abacus. It'll draw cards every time you go through the deck and give you more opportunities to draw the Snakebite and the Hand Trick together. Bellows on the Silent is always good. It will upgrade your opening hand, and the Silent starts with a larger opening hand, and so if she does draw her effects like Prepared, it becomes Prepared Plus, which is more than twice as good, and Snakebite Plus, which is again more than twice as good. 7 triangular, right, on the Snakebite minus is 7 by 8, 56, divide 2, 28, or about 10 triangular, 10 times 11, 110, divide 2, 55, more than, or almost exactly twice as much for the plus 3. But then you would play Snakebite twice. Now 2 Snakebites are more than double the impact of 2 Snakebite pluses are more than double the impact of 2 Snakebite minuses, so you're scaling faster in that kind of regard. Same with Sneko Skull, it allows you to scale the Snakebite faster. And this one here is 4 block if you didn't play any attacks. It's similar to Ardivore, which is an energy if you don't play any attacks. Well, the only attack we've chosen here is Dagger Throw for the cantrip. If you had like a second Prepared, or if you had like an Acrobatics, you would be triggering the free energy, the free block here every single turn. So there's a lot of ways to get block out of this kind of engine, whilst playing that scaling damage, again, all at common, with the exception of the build around uncommon. This one is built around Child of the Stars for the Regent. And again, similar to the Snakebite situation, or similar to the Perfected Strike situation, the idea is that you would be looking to play this combination of cards as often as possible. So Guiding Star is 12 damage and it draws 2 cards. And with Child of Stars, it generates more block for you as well. And then also a common here, we have Gather Light and Solar Strike, which gives you stars for contributing to the output. And then Cosmic Indifference to put Guiding Star on top. So this little package here, by taking stars out of your cards and then putting stars back into Guiding Light, you're generating free block at every stage and generating more output through the power than otherwise. You could replace this with any other like Star Spender. You know, there's the AoE Star Spender for 14 damage. I've just chosen Guiding Star here because it also lets you draw cards, and so like a feasible turn you might have is Guiding Star, 12 damage, draw 2, trigger Child of the Stars twice for 4 block, Gather Light, 7 block up to 11 block, and then maybe like Cosmic Indifference back on top if you need to block more, up to like 17 block, or play a Solar Strike so you can get an extra 8 damage, so 20 damage and 11 block, or 12 damage and 19 block, right? So you can kind of have output in the 30s or potentially the 40s, and depending on which combination you're after, just by having a Child of the Star in the mix. And I suppose a theme for the Regent is that Child of the Stars lets you generate block whilst you're spending stars. Most of the time you're spending stars to attack. So this is kind of like parry for stars. You have parry for the Sovereign Blade, and you have Child of Stars for the star cards. So this one is a bit more applicable because there are more star cards, whereas there's only one Sovereign Blade. Actually, well, there's more ways to generate the Sovereign Blade, so maybe they're both very applicable. Some relics that synergize with this package that, again, you might peel off Niao. You've got the Permafrost again because it's a power. You've got the Strike Dummy because Solar Strike is in the mix, and you can get that scaling there as well. This one, Cosmic Dust, more block when you're spending stars, and so it's kind of like an extra Child of the Stars effect to scale harder. This one, the Little Regent, gives you strength every time you spend stars as well. So with the Little Regent in the play, you'll be generating block from Child of the Stars, and you'll be generating strength from playing stars as well, and so your damage will be scaling. It's one of the few ways I feel like to scale a lot of damage without having the Sovereign Blade on the character, or without finding colorless cards. One of the ways to scale on the character is to generate colorless cards, and then like find a splash to get like Murder, or to get like Ice Lance. Or you can generate Gold Axe from the colorless card generation. Gold Axe can deal a lot of damage as well. Or Parrying Shield. You know, when you're generating a good amount of block every single turn, Parrying Shield's damage adds up quickly. This is maybe like the least underwhelming, but it's because the Regent does need to like solve this star problem at common, so kind of just shuffling these star resources around is really just what you need to do first. If you can solve the star problem on the Regent, everything else kind of comes for free. For the Necrobinder here, this one's centered around Fetch, which is an Osty attack. It's a cantrip. So when you attack with Osty, your Flatten will be free that turn, which is an extra free attack. And when you are attacking with Osty, you can also have Unleash. So you can play Summon from cards like Pull Aggro or Afterlife to build Osty up faster. Grave Warden is just a really, really good block card, which gives you these soul effects. And Flatten, being a 0-cost attack in combination with Fetch, is something that you want to draw more often. So generating souls lets you draw Flatten more often, and I've won many Necro decks. Is how I climbed, actually, and I've done it a couple of times at A10 so far, just playing Flatten over and over. Dredge, Flatten, Fetch, play a bunch of souls, Flatten. My deck is now just like a Flatten, Fetch, and a couple of souls, and I'll just play through the souls and play Flatten again, and take out a Crab Claw, and then turn, and then keep doing it. Sculpting Strike is quite good for this. It adds Ethereal to a card in your hand, so one of the ways, again, the Necrobinder scales is just turn by turn by turn. Sculpting Strike lets you exhaust another one of those cards to improve your deck as turns go on. The next time you draw Sculpting Strike, you can do it again. And eventually, yeah, you're just playing like fetch, flatten, soul, flatten, pull aggro the block. Bone Flute dominates that kind of situation again, because you're generating block the entire time you're doing it, and also all of your ninja relics will be scaling with this kind of strategy, because these Osti attacks do count towards the ninja relic, so you can trigger Shuriken and Kunai and Ornamental Fan and Kusaragawa. You're also playing a good amount of souls, and souls are skills, so you can go towards the tuning fork. And when you're playing these turns with a lot of attacks, you might not always be generating block. Orichalcum can do that for you. Orichalcum plus summon will solve all other turns, because even if they're attacking for 7 or 8, Osti will absorb that for you, and Orichalcum can do a lot of the work. If Osti is big enough, it starts to look like an apparition, right? And so as you're playing Bodyguard, as you're playing Pull Aggro or Afterlife, or as you're eating your souls on Osti, or as you're playing through like attacks with Sikkim, or any of these other uncommons that could be here in this fetch slot too, with Flatten. Flatten being a common is the most important part of this, right? You do get to use cards like Orichalcum or Orichalcum Fake to absorb a lot of damage and spread the rest out over Osti. And then of course as well, because it's a very like combo orientated thing, you can do the classic building and spending of Pocket Watch. You can have turns that are like Pull Aggro Grave Warden, block the whole turn. Next turn, trigger Pocket Watch, draw 8, fetch, get a cantrip, flatten, play a flatten, soul, flatten again, Sculpting Strike, remove another card. And now we have like another weak 5 card hand. Maybe you play Pull Aggro, Sculpting Strike again, or maybe you play like Defend, Grave Warden. And then the next turn, you get to Pocket Watch again, have another explosive turn. And every time you have these explosive turns, you get to fix the deck faster, and you get to scale the capacity to recycle and have this explosive turn every turn faster. And so that's what I mean by like Necrobinder scales with turns. Every single turn, her deck is getting better. She's got more temporary HP that the enemies need to fight through, and her card selection is improving all the time. You can play it wrong. You can take away a key card. It's possible. And then for the defects, let's talk about the defects package here. This one's built around Glacier, which I feel like is a very, very safe first pick. Just take Glacier anytime you see it. And Claw. So as mentioned, Claw is like a single card damage solution. It's a common as well. You can take an early Claw as like a damage common, and then depending on the way the draft goes, you might not need to take any other damage commons, because you can just replay the Claw over and over again. Hologram, especially Hologram Plus, really, really helps. And one thing about the orbs on Defect is that the orbs are self-synergistic, because when you retain the orbs, you get their effect per turn, and when you evoke the orbs, you get 2 turns worth of effect right now. So, like it's totally reasonable just to spin these orbs around, and effects like Cool Head and Lightning Rod really, really help. Lightning Rod I've been particularly impressed by in these kind of orb synergy packages, because it generates 2 orbs over multiple turns, which lets you like just tee up evokes down the line. And so over multiple turns, you can always evoke a Frost Orb at the start and start ahead on the block strategy. This kind of package is just about playing Frost Orbs over and over, and every time you draw that Claw, play that Claw and scale that Claw as well. And the Frost package is going to carry enough block from turn to turn that the risk of taking damage from turn to turn is relatively low. It's not 0, unfortunately, because you could end up with like all strikes and then only get 6 damage only get 6 blocks out of Frost Orbs, and maybe you take an attack of 13 or 14 from like the Sea Punk. Are you fighting the Sea Punk on floor 7? Maybe you went to a shop, maybe you got a card reward at the start, maybe you bought a scroll box, and your scroll box had like Hologram Claw Lightning Rod. Like that's not like too unreasonable. Some relics to go with this though. Sturdy Clamp again. It's a way to mitigate risk from turn to turn of a high block strategy. And the Runic Capacitor, or any kind of capacitor, right? Like any kind of orb slot scaling. is kind of like Sturdy Clamp, kind of like holding on to more cards in hand. The defect scales with the orbs that they're holding, and so more orb slots means more reliable output turn by turn. Gold-plated cables again is kind of like an extra orb slot. And data disk is focused to scale all of your orb slots. And of course this one is pendulum according to the live, or the cradle according to the live, which draws you more cards the more times you cycle your deck. Cards like Claw, that are zero cost damage effects, which scale their damage according to how many times you've drawn them, or like Hang, or like King's Kick, or like I think there was another one I mentioned way back when, I can't remember now. But these ones, they benefit from card draw in particular. And so all these kind of relics will, these are just 5 example relics of how to synergize with the strategy. And you could see these ones early. You could take like a golden pearl and go to a shop and buy a runic capacitor from a shop. Or you could get a sturdy clamp and a cradle from like a large capsule from Niao, or like a data disk and a cradle. These things are very feasible, and if you do roll these kinds of effects, you can look towards your synergies really early. Like if I roll an early cradle, I take a claw early. If you get a runic capacitor from an early shop, like buy a glacier with it, absolutely. Anyway, this one's proven to be my longest video so far. There's so much to cover with synergy. So if you've reached this point, thank you so much for watching. And I'm sure at this point you've heard my voice go and come back and go and come back, as I've kind of been warming it up as we chat. This is all in one sitting, so I might edit a couple of points out where I had coughing fits. If I left them in, I do apologize, and thank you for sitting through those as well. But yeah, in summary, synergies enable buy a card, allow you to improve your evaluation while drafting based on your build. Synergy is a way to evaluate cards in the card pick screen. I don't think that they're things that you draft towards particularly. I think they're things that you can, and I do think that you should usually draft a card as opposed to skipping. So this isn't like, skip propaganda, but if you're looking at 3 different cards and one of them has more synergies than the others, you can increase your evaluation of that card quite substantially, unless it's like a single solution rare, right? Like if you have 7 stars up against like a cosmic indifference, well, 7 stars probably should win because it solves so many problems that even cosmic indifference doesn't solve. To summarize though, you should be considering your deck's existing block density especially, because that's how you take most of your damage from fight to fight. And if you have cards on the table like Dash or like Flame Barricade that severely increase your block density, you should be strongly considering those, even if they're not synergistic. Your deck's existing damage scaling. If you're looking at a boss and you don't really have any way to scale your damage against that, or your damage is falling off mid-fight, you have nothing no front loader damage to take down like a slime or something, and you're suffering damage from it later turns. Think about ways to solve that output. Maybe you should be taking a backstab. Maybe you should be taking a gamma ray to pop like an ad very quickly, or maybe you should be taking a reap on the Necrobinder, even though it has no synergy. Some of those fights, like just a reap, just kill an ad, and then you can get back to outscaling the ad that's left over. What powers have you been able to draft so far? Like a lot of the time people might skip powers because they don't synergize with the cards in the deck, but often if you see a power, maybe it's worth taking just to build around it. Like I take Child of the Stars quite a lot, and then you only have 1 card in the deck to work with in the base deck. Same with Shroud on the Necrobinder. It's 2 block every time you apply Doom. Well, if you take it, it improves all of your Doom applying effects with block. Well, block is what goes with Doom, so it's like it's closing the loop on the Doom defense cycle. What relics have you found so far? This one might be the most important because relics are very reliable. You have relics in your bar, you don't need to draw them. They're pretty much like potions, but they're always active, right? There's very few relics in the game that have like temporary effects. And yeah, if you have relics in your bar, you probably should be considering them quite strongly in drafting around them and enabling those effects. And especially if the relics are synergized with your character and the things that your character already wants to do, or the cards you've already drafted on the character. You can be thinking about those effects in your character's common pool again. I like to think about common. I think the most, it's the pool that's reliable. I think there's about a 50% chance, or slightly lower than 50% chance, to see a specific uncommon on the run. If you take a lot of fights, or if you have like the hunt, or if you have a prayer wheel, it gets above 50%, but it's never 100. But like the opposite for a common, like conceiving of a run where you don't see a copy of every common is pretty much inconceivable. There's only 20 of them, and they show up two times in every card reward on average. So, it's less inconceivable that you won't see a particular common than you will see a particular uncommon. Put it that way. What problems do you need to solve immediately? If your HP is low, you got to be solving that block problem now, right? Like if your HP is already fairly low, especially in the underdogs, you just have to find block. Doesn't matter if it's synergistic, doesn't matter if it's expensive, right? Just jam it in there. And if you don't need to consider that, well, you should be considering what boss you have at the end of the act. If you haven't solved the boss yet, card rewards are the only way you're going to do that. Look at the boss and look at the effects it's going to throw at you. Do you need to, if it's the kin, do you need to kill an ad really quickly with front-loaded damage? If it's the Phantom, do you need some multi-hit effects? And do you need like a big block effect for turns 3 and 7 and 11? If it's the Ceremonial Beast, again, do you need some card selection so that on the bell turn, you can top deck your Glitter Stream, or top deck your Bulwark? And if it's the fish, do you have an effect to dispose of those beacons, or do you have an effect so that you can guarantee you have a good hand occasionally? The fish will attack your hand from both directions. They'll give you beacons, which you need to spend energy on to dispose of. And if you do somehow have a good hand, there's like a 30% chance it's going to be intangible, right? So it's attacking both ends of the spectrum of your hands, giving you bad hands and then also making your good hands redundant. So it's doubly important to solve the problem of fixing your deck on the fly there. Take some card generating effects, take an ethereal card per turn, take some exhaust effects to get rid of these things, like a burning pact, even an unupgraded burning pact, even an unupgraded true grit, and just give yourself the chance to start burning those beacons. And then the fights you've not yet solved, like if you're coming to the end of Act 1 and you've got the boss solved, well, what are you going to see in Act 2? You're going to see a lot of multi-hit fights. You're going to see a lot of multi-enemy fights. The hive is all roaches. It's just all roaches all the way down. And you do need AoE for the hive. Maybe not for the Mr. Bees, for Monsieur Bees, and maybe not for the Dorito, for the Nether Star, is that what it's called? Nether Star's a Minecraft thing, right? But for the roaches, you can just take a lot of damage if you can't do multi-hit or AoE to take them down. They will scale very quickly, and they'll be attacking for like 5x4 pretty regularly, right? And the ways to solve these are with strength down, and with thorns, and with AoE, with stomp effects. It's crucial that you do just have access to these, and especially if you're coming out of the underdogs, because if you went through the underdogs and you didn't solve the eels, or if you just avoided them, or if you just took 50 damage to like the Phantasmal Gardeners, there's a good chance you're not prepared for the hive yet, right? So you might need to consider solving the hive, even if you've already survived the Phantasmal Eels fights. Just here I've got this graphic which aligns each relic around the other relics that are closest to it in terms of synergy. And I suppose the point of this graphic is just to say that everything synergizes with everything. Like the game, sometimes the heuristic is pretty simple, and one of the things about Slay the Spire is that just everything goes together with everything else. Like a Pocket Watch and Unceasing Top might be at opposite ends of the spectrum there, and Kusaragawa and like this block, if you don't play any attacks, are obviously the opposite ends of the spectrum, because you can't ever trigger Kusaragawa and trigger this in the same turn. But like in the middle here, there's a lot of overlap. You know, if you're playing attacks, you can generate attacks out of scaling strength out of shuriken, and scaling damage out of pen nib, and energy out of nunchucks. You can also scale dexterity out of the what's that called? I keep forgetting what this bloody thing, kunai. And that lets you detract from powers, right? You need to do less scaling from powers because it gives you dexterity. All these effects do something similar here, and letting all these effects do something similar and let you avoiding powers, because they'll solve like a problem that the power would solve, right? Leather opener and parry shield the same. Or right down here at this end of the spectrum, pocket watch can give you a bigger hand, and it can give you more advantage turn by turn. Having something like tungsten rod to mostly solve those turns, but take a little bit of chip damage turn by turn. Tungsten rod is kind of like adding, you know, dexterity to every single one of the hits you'll take. So it's like free dex, kind of like kunai. Or here the wristband, is this one called? I forget what it's called, but it's block it per card at the end of turn. So with like pocket watch, you can generate more block at the end of turn, get like a free 5 block. And if you're drawing like 8 cards, playing 3, that's 5 block a turn. That's an extra defend, right? That's kind of like an extra energy. If you're taking turn by turn by turn, well, Mercury Hourglass starts to look really good. And now you've got an energy package and a damage package that doesn't need to be playing attacks. So maybe like a leather opener, or I should remember what this one's called. Anyway, you can kind of get the point. No matter where you start on this kind of graphic, the relics around it will have close synergy, and that's my point. Almost all the relics in the game have a synergy with everything else, because you need to do everything in the game. You need to win every fight. You can't like lose 2 fights on the way up the Spire and say, oh yeah, I've got a bad matchup. My deck has a bad matchup against Splinter Twin, but Splinter Twin's out of the meta, and maybe if somebody brings Splinter Twin, I can just lose to it. I can still go like 8-2 and make the top 8 and win the tournament. The Spire is less forgiving. You know, you don't have to make the top 8. You have to make the bosses at the end. And that means you do need to win every matchup. You know, you can't sideboard for any of them. You can't ignore any of them and say that they won't be in the meta. You can kind of begin to ignore some elites because you can path around them, but even then, the map, on a lot of maps, you will have a guaranteed elite, and you will still need to go in them, at least for one elite. If you have a guaranteed elite in Act 2 and it's Decimillipede, like, I get that. My runs end because I can't solve Decimillipede. I try and path around them, and I have a guaranteed elite, and I lose to Decimillipede. Is it frustrating? Yeah. Can I do more to do it? Yeah. I mean, I'm probably not solving Decimillipede in Act 1. One thing I'm doing is I'm undervaluing cards like Melancholy, but I'll see how I go. Anyway, we're there. Hopefully everyone's been enjoying Slay the Spire too. Again, posting daily runs on the channel. If anyone wants a run to watch over lunch, or a second monitor content or anything like that, a lot of them will be commentated. They'll be marked with no commentary if they're just something fast. But yeah, thank you very much for reaching this point. Like and subscribe. Any questions about any of this in the comments? Appreciate there's probably some guides out there about drafting and about synergies that will do like demo drafts and things like that. I feel like everything that I've kind of discussed and presented here today gives you the foundational framework to like make these decisions for yourself and begin evaluating these things for yourself. A lot of it doesn't need to be hard and fast, and really, like, if I gave you rules like I'll always take 7 stars, or always take Piercing Whale, or always take Speedster and upgrade Speedster for an 8 or something like that, like, well, you could probably A, work that out for yourself, and B, like, then that person's just enjoying the game less. So, for me, the enjoyable part is experimenting in the game and thinking about it, and, even though I've been talking for 2 hours here, I really enjoyed it, so... I hope you enjoyed listening. Anyway, thank you as always, and hope you have a good week ahead and enjoy the game, and all the best, everyone. Ciao, ciao, ciao.